Welcome back to Set Sail with Grace Harbor. I'm David, and today is September 7th in our chronological Bible reading plan. For the past several days, we've been journeying through some pretty heavy parts of Ezekiel. Judgment on Israel, Judah, and surrounding nations. But today we're turning a corner. Ezekiel chapter 34 through 36 depicts a shift from judgment to restoration, offering some of the most helpful and well-known prophecies in the entire book. God promises to restore his people. He isn't just a God of judgment. He's the God of redemption also. He will act not because the people deserve it, but for the sake of his own holy name. So let's get started with chapter 34. In this chapter, it's a scathing indictment of the failed leadership of Israel, who are described as unfaithful shepherds. The main point here is God's promise to replace these corrupt leaders and to shepherd his people himself. Ezekiel rebukes the shepherds of Israel, the kings and the civil leaders, for their selfishness. They feed themselves, but they neglect the flock. They don't strengthen the weak, heal the sick, or search for the lost. Instead, they rule by force and harshness and scatter the sheep, leaving them vulnerable. This is a metaphor for the spiritual and political failures of Israel's leadership, and it calls the reader's attention to the root cause of the nation's sin that results in judgment. The shepherds have failed in their duties. They've shunned or killed those who called out to them. But then God says, "Behold, I myself will search for my sheep, and I will seek them out." He promised to do everything the human shepherds had failed to do. He will gather them from the nations, bring them back to their own land, and feed them on the mountains of Israel. He promised to heal the sick, strengthen the weak, to set over them one shepherd, my servant David. Now this last part, it's a clear messianic prophecy. The servant David, it's not King David, who's been long dead by this point. It's a reference to the future king in the line of David, Jesus Christ, the good shepherd, who lays down his life for his sheep. So chapter 34's main point is the promise of the leadership from God himself, culminating ultimately in the shepherd Jesus. Next we have chapter 35. Now this chapter might seem like an abrupt return to judgment, but it's actually a necessary part of the restoration narrative. The main point here is the judgment against Mount Seir, which is represented by the nation of Edom. The Edomites, who were descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, had a history of being a perpetual enemy towards Israel. When Israel fell, they rejoiced and sought to take possession of this desolate land. In recent times, we've actually seen events in the media that give us a pretty good picture of what's being said here. After the atrocities that happened in Israel by Hamas when they rushed in, created havoc, killing people, taking captives, and the images of some of the nations around them, and even in our own country where people were rejoicing. Well, that might give you a good idea of how Edom was celebrating after Israel and Judah had fallen. Their sin was not just hostility, but malicious gloating over Israel's calamity. God's judgment on Edom is severe and absolute, and he promises to make Mount Seir a perpetual desolation. This serves as a dual purpose. First, it's a response to Edom's deep-seated hatred, but more importantly, it's a message to the exiles in Israel. See, God is showing them that their enemies will not ultimately triumph. The land of Edom had tried to seize what belongs to the people of God, and God will deal with those who tried to take it. It's a statement of vindication. God is not finished with his people. And it leads us to one of the most beautiful and well-known chapters in all of Ezekiel, chapter 36. Here we find an outline of a twofold restoration of the physical land and the spiritual heart of the people. The first part of this chapter is a prophecy about the mountains of Israel. The land itself, which has been mocked and plundered by nations, is promised a renewal. God says he will cause it to be tilled and sown and bear fruit and multiply. He will multiply upon the men and beasts, so that the desolate cities can be inhabited again. This is a promise that the physical return from exile will be a reality. But the second part is even more profound. God says the restoration isn't just about the land, it's about the people too. He promises to cleanse them of their sin and of the idols. And he gives them an incredible promise. I will give you a new heart and a new spirit, and I will remove a heart of stone from your flesh and give you hearts of flesh. He says he'll put his spirit within them, enabling them to follow his laws. This is a heart of the new covenant that's promised in the Bible. This promise that goes far beyond the return to the land. It's a promise of a complete spiritual transformation, a renewed nature, a new desire, and the power to obey God. This is not just for Israel's righteousness, but for the sake of my holy name, as God says, which has been profaned among the nations. And let me insert this little message right here. This new heart, this new power to follow and obey God, it's not just for the nation of Israel. It's the covenant that Jesus made with all who believe in him as their Lord and Savior. So to summarize these 3 chapters, Ezekiel 34, we see God is the ultimate shepherd who will care for his flock. In chapter 35, we see his justice and vindication against Israel's enemies. And here in chapter 36, we see the culmination of his redemptive plan, the restoration of the land, and more importantly, the spiritual renewal of the people through a new heart and an indwelling of his spirit. This whole section of Ezekiel tells us that God's plan is one of grace and redemption. Even when we fail, God remains faithful to his promise and committed to restoring his people for his own glory and his own sake. Once again, I want to thank you for watching. You know, I know that YouTube has many more options to occupy your time, and I'm grateful that you chose to spend some of it with us here today. So if this video has been a blessing to you, please like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless you, my friends.